We don't have that many things that happen anymore that are truly startlingly different when we go ahead and go into it. Ebola was one. And Ebola, people would argue with me and say, hey, Ebola's happened before, it's happened in other countries, it's happened in Uganda before, et cetera. And yet it was different in a lot of ways this time. It was very unique and special. One is that out of all our experience and all these years of intervention and planning and stuff, very seldom, in fact, I would argue never, did we have health be the reason that we were doing a complex emergency response. There have been epidemics before, there's been issues going on, but something this grand and this fast and this scary, we'd never had health be the primary and everything else be supporting that somehow. Instead, it was something else. It was trafficking, or it was effects of a war, or it was famine, or something like that, a natural disaster. And health was a very important part of that. It was an important sector, but it was not the primary in this somehow. So that was very interesting and different this time. And we'll talk about that in terms of how health got caught by surprise. But so the first one on my list is just health as number one. Out of all the planning and practicing, that was the first time. Second is the view back when this all started, you will remember this, was the risk was extreme. When this hit the news media and people got so scared about this, they did an awful lot of projection and planning and scientific formulas. And basically it was, if you're there and you get sick, you're dead. So if you're associated with this, this is bad news. In terms of location, health and infection didn't care if you lived in a city or lived in a rural location. This was just cutting down people if they got associated with this. So the very interesting future, and if all of you are thinking about your future career, or thinking about peri-urban, where the majority of people live that are in states of change, this affected peri-urban, dense urban, and rural people equally somehow. Because it wasn't country specific, although a lot of it was shaped by that, it ran across borders. It doesn't care about politics somehow. So by being regional versus national, you had cultural differences, you had language differences, Francophone as well as Anglophone, and you just had a lot of political mechanisms that were very different in that case. So again, I guess another thing that's very interesting versus the way we're all trained, set up, equipped, et cetera, we tend to do it on a state basis, a political basis by state. Well, this was regional. So that's another thing that was very unique. And then as I talked about, just the extremely mobile nature of EVD is it could, because it's transmitted by people that are infected, and a lot of them either don't know they're infected or they hide that they're infected, all somebody needs to do is jump on a bus or take a trip and go somewhere else, and suddenly it skips the 5 places in between and people are sick at the other end. So the idea of these hot spots popping up all over was very real, which is terrifying to everyone as well. So that was quite unique in terms of this. It's not that you can define the camp or the war or the earthquake or something like that. This was like wherever it touches. The political sensitivity of this. And in a lot of ways, this was unique with this. One is that it was referenced this morning, and I think you all are mid-career professionals, so I think you all understand the idea of level 3 versus level 2 versus level 1. Level 3 is the most complex. It means you've exceeded the ability of local or even regional to adequately address this, so it goes to international somehow in terms of the UN system. So the L3 is a political decision in the UN system, which donor governments support by being members or otherwise donating. In this case, there was no L3 declared until versions very late. And it wasn't for many political reasons. The host governments involved, which started with Liberia, but very much other countries following suit, is they didn't want to be labeled as a crisis country and a country that was collapsing. And level 3, that's really embarrassing in a lot of ways. And not just embarrassing, it hurts things. It hurts trade agreements, it hurts travel, it hurts people willing to bring goods in, the whole commerce idea of society, and in terms of just any sort of enriching activity with the society, it put it on hold somehow. And these presidents were smart enough, there was no way in hell they were going to agree to that. So they said, no, we don't agree to be called L3. We can say we've got a health problem, we can say we've got a health crisis, but by not calling it an L3, it prevented UN and people associated with UN of activating all the protocols that were arranged. That soon as they pushed the button and officially say this is an official L3, then lots of streamlining and shortcuts in terms of decisions and resources and things get kicked into gear. By not saying it, none of that was allowed to work. So over the years, it's happened before where things have been refused as an L3, and a lot of agencies, and Sanjeev mentioned this, people have gotten clever how to work around this if it's not an L3, but it's clumsy. It's not nearly as simple as doing the L3 mechanism. So that was a challenge somehow with the L3. So the alternates got started up. So maybe I could mention that too, just the idea of L3 or not. Okay, the next one that was very unique about this, and it's a growing one that won't stay unique long, but it's growing, and Sanjay mentioned this too, is that we have multiple L3s. And it was interesting hearing people here say 5 or 4, which is basically right, and those are well known. But the tier under that, speaking as both the US government, but also as international organization, we track this so carefully, as some of your organizations do. There's another half dozen countries that could be in L3 tomorrow. Where some of them have gotten more publicity than others, but there's whole groups of countries and situations with societies and populations that could suddenly, for political reasons, be declared L3 to start that fast mechanism. That's a challenge in terms of this, and it was in terms of this too, because the world and the relief world, humanitarians and otherwise, have never dealt with this before. Back when we started, there was no such thing. Once it was created on the basis of this is level 3. This is the most complex and unique. We'll have one of these, and then we'll solve it. Then luckily, we'll wait a little while, then there'll be another one, and then we'll wait a little while, and there'll be another one. And then finally it got where, wow, we had 2 back to back. And then it got, wow, we didn't finish the first one and we're starting the second one. And then it was, we didn't finish the first one, we didn't start the second one, and now we must start the third one. And now we must start the fourth one. Well, there is a finite number of resources and logistics and brain power with people that matter, either in terms of the analysis, putting forward proposals in your service response, but also for politicians and the prioritization for a lot of reasons. It's gone beyond people's comprehension how to do this well. And the dilemma is these often don't end anymore. They're so complex that they just bleed on and bleed on and bleed on. Syria is a great example of that. How the heck do you decide L3 is over for Syria? That's not an easy one. So we've got Syria bleeding on. We've got North Africa, which could return to that. We've got CAR, on and on, all these different places. Very, very challenging for everyone involved somehow. So Ebola walked into the middle of this. My guess is most of you 3 years ago didn't know the word Ebola. So that's like most people in the world. Specialists did, but they were treating it quite differently than it is now. So when it happened and people said, this is important, let's respond, everybody looked around at all the mechanisms and specialists and arrangements we had, and we didn't have a whole pool of people waiting there that are logisticians that understand how to work with this stuff. Yes, we have cold chain, and yes, we have epidemiologists, but nothing of the scale we're talking about right here. And we needed both Anglophone and Francophone, and we needed people that were available, and we needed people that were that highly skilled as a pool of something that was catastrophic. We needed them to walk right into a place that we just said, hey, will you please go to a place that you might die and go ahead and do this work somehow, these specialists. And a lot of specialists said, no. I'm happy to sit back in my headquarters in Atlanta or somewhere else and work on this, but no way I'm going there. So the ones that did go there, and thank God, a lot of them did go there, but the ones that did go there were pulled off other jobs or were temporary hire contractors, et cetera. So they came and went and came and went and came and went. So we ended up with this revolving door of short-term response. So our next challenge was no staff or temp staff in terms of this. And some of your documentation talks to this challenge of rotating cycles of temporary staff. But in this one, you have host governments that don't want to call it an L3, an emergency that's still being discovered and defined, and a calculus going on, to go ahead and address it somehow, which we don't understand very well, with people who are only there long enough to sort of understand what's going on, then they leave and you have to start working with a new person across the table somehow that's just arrived and has new ideas or no ideas. Hell of a challenge somehow.